Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the August 30th, 2017 webinar for the Wyoming Telehealth Network. My name is Corey Jenkins, and I'm the facilitator for today. Just like to remind you all, if you have questions for today's presenter, if you would like to type those in the chat, you can do that, or if you would just hold your questions until the end, and then we will have, 5 or 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So just write down your questions or go ahead and type them in the chat and we'll get to those at the end. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. And we're pleased to have with us today Stanley Louisant, who is the principal and founder of Fluid Designs, a full-service IT services and support firm that focuses on computer networking and application needs of businesses. Stanley's passion for technology led him to form the firm in 2001. Under his leadership, Fluid Designs has grown from serving a handful of small businesses into a premier IT services company in the northern and central New Jersey regions. Stanley also has a passion for writing about technology-related issues. He's a contributing writer to a number of printed and digital technology magazines. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn our time over to Stanley Louisant, who will be talking to us today about cybersecurity. So
I might actually need to stay there for just a few minutes. Sorry.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to help bring this educational piece to you guys. And of course, it's always a hot button topic of what's going on right now in terms of the threats that exist and, how do we combat them and what do we do and, all that kind of thing. So, from my standpoint, I appreciate the opportunity to bring this content to you guys. All right. So as was mentioned, I am the principal and founder of Fluid Designs. Just a little bit of background about me. I pretty much have that story where I got a computer and never left. So technology has always been a part of my life. And as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing greater, right? Just some industry accomplishments. In 2015, I think it was, or 16, I was featured by Channel Pro, which is an industry magazine, as their cover story, and was also named as one of the Channel Pro 2020 visionaries for 2016. So that was that made mom happy, right? So, so let's talk about hacking, right? People hear the term, you hear it thrown around, and it's used in a wide variety of different scopes, right? So essentially, what is hacking? At the base level, hacking is when you bypass or modify a system outside of its normal operation, right? So, something that was not intended to be has now become. And that's pretty much the basis for hacking. So there's good hacking and there's bad hacking. And in the industry, you might hear people such as white hat hackers, who are hackers who are, out here for the good and trying to, help you with a product or a service that you have a hole in and help plug it. And then there's black hat hackers, right? Which are the guys that wreak havoc and cause problems and, nothing is for good, right? So in the computer industry, I always say that we use simple terms. So white hat means good, right? And black hat means bad. So, that's just the thing, good and evil, essentially. So, and some of the ways in which a hacker will exploit or modify a system is by finding an exploit or a vulnerability. One of the big things about software is, if you've noticed, we all, if you have a Mac computer or an Apple computer or Mac, a PC, one thing is the same, right? There's always an update available, right? There's always something to change. Hey, we got to apply this update. And what updates do is usually a vulnerability is found in your system, the operating system, or a piece of software. So that is applied to help mitigate, that potential risk until the next one is found. So now when we think about hacking, in the early days, and early days, I mean, probably, 80s, 90s, early 90s in the beginning, why did people hack, right? What was the purpose of doing it? And reality is it was pride and glory. You'd find out that it was some young kid who was sitting there and hacked AOL or one of these other outfits. And it was just to say that I did it, right? I feel good. I'm happy. Like, I did this. But it's a different story, right? Things have escalated over time and things have moved up. And why do people do it now? Profits is one reason. Espionage, right? State-sponsored hacking. And then hacktivism, right? Someone feels that they have something here for the greater good. I want to focus a little bit on the profit standpoint. In 2014, there was a study done by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and they estimated that hacking cost you and me in financial losses somewhere between $375 and $575 billion a year. Okay. And that's everything from lost productivity of not being able to do your work, needing to recreate things that may have gone missing, and then the rest of the havoc. Up in 2016, the FBI, their numbers are a lot less. They're claiming that in 2016, it was about $1.3 billion. So either way, or any way to look at it, it's really hitting the economy, right? And we're all feeling it in one way, shape, or form. So let's talk about some of the types of attacks that can occur. I call them attack vectors, right? And pretty much what we mean by attack vectors is, how do these things come in, right? What are the methods in which you and I can be susceptible to a hack? So phishing is a big one. Phishing is essentially, we associate phishing mostly with emails, right? Where you get an email that comes in, hey, this is Bob, your friend. Please click on this link. I sent you a file, right? You click on that link and you fill in your information. Hey, put in your email address, your password. And now someone has now gotten your information and has gained, has unauthorized access to your information. So that's phishing. Social engineering, right, is tailoring things to you and me. Hey, I know Stanley is in the middle of a real estate transaction, so let me tailor something to him that he's more susceptible to click on it than if he wasn't, right? If I didn't know he was doing this. Or in your case, right, the medical profession, hey, you know what? Here's these labs from this hospital or this lab that you're waiting for. Here's this patient's labs, right? So that's something that you see through your normal everyday course of business. And in your mind, it wouldn't be anything. There's nothing to be susceptible about. You just click on the link and, hey, open it up and do what you need to, download this file. So malware, ransomware. The big incident that has happened, probably about a month and a half, 2 months ago, out in a lot of the European hospitals, that was malware and ransomware, right? Where something gets injected into your system, your files then get literally held hostage, right? These folks are locking up your files. They're putting passwords on it or encrypting them. And you cannot get the decryption key until you spend money, right? Or you pay the ransom. So back in the day when you used to hear, right, somebody took their, folks were getting kidnapped and, in those old movies we used to watch, right? The person gets kidnapped, they get the phone call, we have your daughter, this is how much money you have to pay to get her back. It's the same concept, except now it's digital and it's happening with your client files, your patient files, and everything of this sort. Next one is a denial of service attack. So any website that we use on the internet right now, right, we're using Zoom meeting, is susceptible to what's called a denial of service, where it's a group of computers distributed across the world that are all trying to access that same resource at the same time. And when that happens, everything comes to a halt, right? So it's essentially like, you got 100 people trying to walk through one door at the same time, and the door is only made for one person at a time. So that's essentially what we call a denial of service attack. Session hijacking and man in the middle. Anyone, I'm sure, you can't raise your hands because I can't see everybody right now, but everybody's been to a public Wi-Fi network, right? You go to Starbucks, you go to a conference, you connect to the wireless network, and then what do you get next? The next thing that happens is, hey, please accept this terms. and then we allow you access to our network. But what session hijacking and man in the middle do, so you guys know, is it's someone intercepting the traffic between you and the website you're accessing. So they present it as such as they are an authorized participant, and all you have to do is hit accept at the bottom here. But everything you do from that moment forward with that particular website or on that particular network, you're filtering it through a third party who is capturing your information and everything that you're sending, and then delivering it, handing it off to the actual website you're trying to reach. So that man in the middle is essentially no different than when somebody used to go to your phones and put the butt set outside to listen in on your conversation, and you have no idea that someone is actually participating as well, a third party. So I gave you guys a brief history, right? And the reason I do it is, where do you guys fit in all this, right? You guys are healthcare providers, telemedicine, the whole 9 yards, right? Where do you guys fit? Well, it's an unfortunate stat for you, but you guys are number one in data breaches, unfortunately. The healthcare sector is number one. There are more healthcare data breaches than any other industry. This chart here that cites 2014, you can see healthcare was 42% of the breaches that happened in 2014. Most other general businesses and sectors, 33% total, government 12%, and other 13%. So you guys walk every day in the digital sphere with a target on your back, whether you know it or not. And this pretty much helps. And in addition to this, Trend Micro did a healthcare cyber crime report, and they too, last year, 2016, have pretty much come to the same conclusion that the healthcare sector is number one for data breaches. Why, right? Why are we so famous, right? Why does everybody want us? Why does everybody want what we have, and why are we attacked? In 2016, based on the study done by the Healthcare Information and Management Systems Society, medical identity theft was the number one concern of actually medical practitioners and healthcare providers. It's a report where you guys get to go and fill in what you think your concerns are, for the coming year and protection. And it's pretty interesting that the number one concern, which among 77 respondents of that study that they did, was medical identity theft. You all deal with medical identity, and what's in a patient's profile via EHR and all that. And essentially, you have everything that you need to do some damage to somebody through that profile. The next one, which I found it actually interesting, was aside from the medical identity theft being a concern, the second concern was actually black market organized crime. I guess not that I guess, I know it's happening. There is some stuff happening where, like I can say state sponsored or organized crime, where guys are actually getting together and they're attacking, right, and trying to get medical identity stuff so that they can use it for their purposes. And those purposes I've seen have been even going in, getting healthcare insurance as somebody else, or going in and getting treated, right? Hey, what's your medical insurance information, right? They hand over someone else's information that they stole, and they pretend to be that person going forward and get the benefits of, a health insurance provider. So in 2015, we have just about 113.2 million healthcare records were stolen in that year alone, and confirmed stolen. So we have to clarify that, right? So, there's something about hacking and breaches that people talk about, which sometimes you were breached and you don't know, right? When we heard about the Target breach, it was a year and a half, 2 years after it actually occurred. So, just based on what we know, in 2015, we were dealing with about 113.2 million healthcare records that were stolen from providers. So health records, right? What's, like I mentioned earlier, what's the value? What's in there? Why does anybody care? Well, in your electronic health record, you have everything. You have somebody's demographics, right? You have their insurance information. You got their mailing address. You got their social security number. You got their birth date, medication, right? History and things like that, what they take. Billing information, right? If you guys store that, you also have people's credit card numbers stored in, depending on the type of EHR or system you're using, that could be stored in the system as well. So, I mean, all this stuff is valuable information to anybody who can get their hands on it. So to me, an EHR system, which is great. I know we push them, the electronic guys, right? We talk about it. The government has their initiatives for it. Well, one of the big things about an EHR system is it combines everything that makes somebody up in terms of their history, right? You have that PII data, you got their medical history, you got their insurance information, and you got their financial. All right. This is very unique in all industries. Healthcare is the number one. I mean, you guys are the primary industry that actually has this stuff in one system, right? And it's consistent across the board. Other industries don't have that, and that's why you guys are number one with a target on your backs. Because if somebody's going to go and go to hack somebody or put in the effort to do these things, the effort they put in to hack a healthcare company is really no different than they would to hack, let's say, a person who's an accounting firm or something like that. The effort is the same. So these guys make a decision to pick a target that will yield, of course, the highest results for them, right? What's another thing about PII? There's no expiration date, right? So on the black market, healthcare records even have command a higher price, and I'll show you guys that a little bit later, than other information, just because you have information here that doesn't change. My name doesn't change, my date of birth isn't going to change, and we're all American citizens here for the most part. Try getting a new social security number, right? Hey, something happened, I've been compromised, there's theft, can you guys give me a new social security number? The answer is always no. And for the longest time, and I know the industry has changed in terms of how we deal with our healthcare providers, right? Providers, for the most part, used to ask you your insurance ID number, which was your social security number. Now we've gotten away from that practice, but healthcare providers still ask for your social security number, right? Mostly for a billing issue. If somebody doesn't pay or there's an issue, you want to be able to go back and have some recourse and have everything you need on that person. So that's pretty much why you guys have a target on your back, because there's no expiration date on this information once somebody gets it. So, what are some of the uses, right? Like I said, you can obtain pharmaceuticals. Of course, we know there's always a pharmaceutical crisis at any point in time. Right now it's opiates. It's been other things in the past. And I'm sure, things like that will just continue to evolve, right? You can commit insurance fraud. Like I tell everybody, your insurance card, at least here in Jersey, don't know out by you guys, my picture's not on my insurance card, right? And of course, finally, to obtain medical care, right? Medicare, Medicaid, those kind of things, and get those benefits going forward. So here's some, I want to share this with you guys, pretty much the dark web, right? So when you go on Google and you go on the internet, you're on what we call the main web, right? Everything that you see on the surface. Unfortunately, as with anything, there's a dark side to anything. So there's something called the dark web. And the dark web was essentially created by the government, our government. And it was really created to allow people or folks in countries where, they don't have free reign to do what they want on the internet. It was created to allow those people to bypass the normal mechanisms and access the internet. That was one of the primary purposes. And it has a big cloak of anonymity, which is why it happened. So when something gets stolen and somebody needs to sell it or offload it, this is where they go. They take it to the dark web. So the dark web, so here's an article from the Dark Reading, which was showing how an EHR was compromised. An EHR system was compromised, and the data was all fetched out of the database. And it was essentially selling on the dark web for about $500,000. And that would have tons and tons of information, not just one client record or one patient record, right? You're talking about the EHR database, which has majority of anyone who would have visited that practice at the time. So that's the next step. So someone goes and gets breached, some third party has the information, it's really no value to them. and they'll sell it to somebody else, right? So they take it to the dark web, and that's where that selling happens. Here's another ad on one of the sites on the dark web. Medical clinic records for sale, one hand only, right? Meaning only one person has touched it. Meaning, I'm the hacker. I hacked that information. I grabbed it. I haven't shared with anybody else. I got 5,200 records for you. Here's all the stuff right here. What do we have here? You have the patient's first name, middle name, last name, addresses, right? City, state, zip code, home, date of birth, patient social security number, and sex, right? Here you go. Pretty much, right? This was going for, I think, 99 bucks. So pricing has come down, depending on what you're doing, right? Hack Clinic, Minnesota, USA was pretty much where this breach happened. So how prevalent is this, right? Is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? I hear what you're saying, but should I really be concerned? Is it going to affect me? Well, it's pretty prevalent. From a Big Glass Healthcare breach report, it's 1 in 3 Americans have been victims of healthcare data breaches. So that's a pretty big number as far as I'm concerned. And with the breaches that happen, these are all on provider side, right? Stanley's not getting breached individually, right? It's not someone hacking necessarily into my computer. This is all at either my provider side or, potentially my health insurance company as well. So, why should you care, right? What's the big deal? Things happen, I call my insurance carrier, my malpractice insurance carrier, right? We put them on notice and, this stuff kind of goes away. Well, reality is it doesn't just go away. So, HIPAA, the Department of Health and Human Services Offices for Civil Rights, the OCR, right? They impose fines, right? They impose fines on you guys. You get a loss of consumer trust. There are people that will move and use a new provider if they find out that, hey, my information got leaked because they weren't really working hard at protecting myself, right? You get a loss of the consumer confidence, right? Like I said, you can lose your patient to a competing provider who's touting all these benefits that they have. And of course, the costs, right, of reporting it, analyzing how the breach happened, where did it come from, reviewing it, and of course, remediation costs, right? So that's always a big thing as well, is there are ongoing costs that will happen. You bring in experts to try to figure it out, flush it out, and make sure that we are clean and things aren't happening. On the other side, which I didn't mention here, which I should have, is the inability for you to take care of your patients if a breach happens, depending how it happens. If you have a situation where your network is fully compromised and you had ransomware and your files are locked up, all your patient records, your x-rays, your EHR, the whole 9 yards, how are you going to service your patient coming in when you don't even know the next guy running through the door because your appointment and your schedule is in your EHR? How do you know what the results were from this guy's labs because it's all in your EHR that you can't get to right now? So there is more of a consequence in that regard as well. And how are you going to do your job as a provider when a breach happens moving forward? So this actually all ties into HIPAA, of course, right? And the Department of Health and Human Services, OCR, is enforcing, some of the HIPAA rules. And in 2016, there were 13 settlements in terms of financials. They were actually more, outside of the financials, they were actually more things that happened, right? Out of the 13 settlements, there were more reports of breaches. But in terms of what actually finally settled, they came out with what their fines were. So it was about $22.8 million in payments that got distributed by healthcare providers last year for breaches that happened. I actually want to share with you guys some of those costs and some of the type of practices, right? So we have a university medical center that essentially in November of 2016 got hit with $650,000 fine, and they had a malware infection, which is malware ransomware, right, where their files potentially was locked up. Now, there are some other things outside of the breaches, right, that can happen that, we didn't really discuss, but I'll go into a little bit here. We got another health system, right, that had to pay $2.1 million back in October. What was their problem, right? Somebody made a mistake and made PHI data available on the public internet. So, someone was doing a Google search and then you get, PHI data literally popping up here because these guys made a mistake and published that stuff. Another health system, 400 grand, right? They lost 2 unencrypted backup tapes. I'm going to talk about backing up a little bit later, but that's another thing, right? When you're backing up, you have to encrypt the data. We have to make sure the data is protected. So if a third party does get their hands on it or something does go missing, there's no concern that somebody can actually get PII or patient-related data, right? And the biggest one for 2016 was this health system that had to pay $5.5 million because they had a theft of a desktop computer and they lost a laptop. And on top of that, they had a business associate that was accessing data without having the proper procedures in place. So sometimes that's something to remember too, that the breach can happen or the issue can happen, not necessarily with you directly, but with a third party who you work with, a lab or a vendor, right? That you interface with. And that's actually how the Target breach happened, was a third party vendor as well. And then a university medical center had an unprotected network drive, 2.7 mil. So, I just wanted to go through some of this stuff for you guys. Here's another sheet. I essentially charted out all of the breaches that happened, all of the fines that happened in 2016. And then, here, you talk $650,000, $2.2 million, $750,000, $3.9 million, right? $1.5 million, $25,000 and $239,000. So, obviously they range, right? Probably based on the scope and how much things have gone out there. But it's really, they're watching, right? People are watching, right? And I have clients, and by the way, the source of all this stuff is right from the OCR, so you guys know. But, I deal with health professionals, and I have people say, well, there's no HIPAA police running around. I'll tell you right now, you have one incident happen, someone makes a phone call, you do have a duty to report when a breach happens on your side, whether people do that or not. But if a third party reports it, and enough of them do it, believe me, the HIPAA police will be knocking on your door. So protecting patient data, right? How do we do it? To me, for you guys, and especially what you're doing and how you're doing it, to me, protecting your patient data is the equivalent of protecting yourself, okay? Because you are the gateway to the patient data for the most part. So if you protect yourself, then by default, the patient data will be protected. So I want to just take you guys through a few things here and just help you out to, what can we do and how can we protect ourselves as we go through our day, as we interact, as we use these systems that we have. How do we go about what we're doing? So one of the big things is a third-party audit, okay? You can do internal audits as well. You check your systems out. You see what you guys have. You find where the holes are in those systems. You can bring in a third party as well to come in and do those audits for you, give you a full report of what they see happening in your environment. And by the way, I know in regards to telemedicine that, some practitioners, work it out of their homes, or they might work out of their offices, where they run another practice. So this stuff can be done in those places as well. So it's not limited to, just a hospital taking care of this stuff. This stuff is applicable to you in your own individual environment as well, because you are potentially a breach point. Vulnerability testing, right, which is essentially somebody going in there and finding all the loops, all the holes, right, all these things. Penetration testing, same kind of thing, just done in a different fashion. And then there are some hardware solutions, right, that you guys at a base level should always have implemented. Firewalls. Firewall is essentially what protects you and your internal environment, right, and network between you and the outside internet. So you should have a firewall that's pretty much a UTM, which is a unified threat management. Security is a multi-layered approach, and I do want to highlight that in that multi-layered approach, you have to factor in that we're gonna stack things, right? And the firewall is essentially at the base of that stack. It's one of the first things that we do. Hey, you got an internet connection from Optimum Online, Verizon Fios, Comcast, Time Warner, Spectrum, whoever it is, right? The next thing you're going to do after you get that connection from those guys is you're going to put a firewall in, right? And that firewall is essentially going to filter out threats that are coming into you unbeknownst to you. So, we have a unified threat, a UTM firewall. and you have also a next generation firewall. And these are not the same thing as the firewalls you see, you know, when you go to Staples or one of those big box stores. These are more business grade and not consumer grade equipment, you know, items. So, you know, just be cognizant of that. And then we have software-based solutions, right? Encryption. Encryption is a must. Everybody has a cell phone. Everybody has, you know, a laptop. You have tablets. You have all these things that can be left places, or you can forget, or, you know, you can have it on or someone can steal from you, right? So when you encrypt your data, what that means is without that decryption key is what we call it, without that ability to decrypt the data, a third party who gets that information cannot decipher what's there. So it's completely meaningless to you. So if you have patient data on your laptop and your laptop is encrypted and you go to Starbucks, you forget your laptop there, you leave, you come back, you know, you realize it's gone, someone stole it, they will not be able to access any of the data that you have on that device unless they know the decryption key, which they don't know because you know it, right? The next thing, antivirus, right? We're going back to stacking that security, you know, security being a stackable thing, right? So antivirus is a must, right? Anti-malware, right? Making sure that, hey, if you click one of those links in your email box, that is redirecting you to a place you shouldn't be, your anti-malware package will catch it. Email spam filtering is a big one. That's mostly from your email provider, not necessarily you, unless you have your own internal IT team that's taking care of things. But that's another mechanism where we're filtering out. Big one, and a lot of people aren't doing this and more should, and it should be a requirement. In my opinion, I would make it a requirement for you guys, is application containerization. So when you open up your phone or your device, right, you would actually have two separate containers. It's just like one of those Rubbermaids that's split into two at the middle. You go on the left, you pick this button here to go to look at all your stuff relating to work in the office, and you go on the right to get back to your personal stuff. So what that means is your personal emails, photos, things of that nature, text messages will be separated out from your work stuff as well. And then the next thing is data backup. To protect yourself against ransomware, in my mind, I like to think of when something happens, not if it's going to happen. And I like to play out the worst case scenario. So if something does happen where your data gets compromised and you do get malware and someone is holding your stuff hostage, we want to be able to go to a backup that you have and restore all your data and not pay the ransom. Because every person that pays the ransom, all we're doing is encouraging these guys to continue to do what they're doing, right? So one of the major ways to combat that, aside from not getting infected in the first place, is to, of course, have a copy of the data so we can restore in case something happens. So the fun part of my job is always user education, right? Unfortunately, as much as I love all of us as humans, we are the weakest link, right? The technology is not necessarily the problem. You know, it's always us. Human error actually accounts for a majority of the issues that happen in terms of people getting ransomware and stuff like that, and even causing downtime in terms of systems. So I know in the medical community, sharing passwords is kind of something that happens. And let me give you an explanation. You need to put an order in at the hospital, right? People like, oh, hey, nurse, can you put it in for me? Here's my credentials, or I'm signed into the system already. Please go in and do that for me as me. So, you know, you don't want to share those passwords. You do not want to share your credentials with third parties. If possible, enable two-factor authentication. Two factors where you would put your username and your password, and then to facilitate you getting in that third system, maybe you'll get a text message to your cell phone, or, you know, you guys have a security key depending on what you're doing. So what that allows you to do is, if somebody does have your credentials, unless they have that next piece of information that's going to come just to you directly, they won't be able to sign into a system as you. Next one, don't use third-party devices, right? You go to a conference, right? People love giving away those USB flash drives. Here you go, no charge, take it. I got some content information. With what you guys do, do not use those things. Don't put them into your machine. that is another point of infection that can happen, where someone can give you a USB drive that's infected with malware, you put it in, and then the malware now makes its way into your system. And of course, do not open emails and or attachments from unidentified individuals. If you weren't expecting an email from UPS with a file, or FedEx with a file, or a lab or something like that, do not. And now, these guys are also working a little bit differently, right? They're actually calling people, right? You know, this is Microsoft calling you. Do me a favor, go to this website for me, and I'm going to jump on your computer and make sure everything's cool. Do not allow a random person who calls to access your computer or device, right? Say no. And, you know, in terms of remote workers, right, what are some of your protections, right? In terms of mobile devices. Oh, I apologize, guys. I kind of duplicated this here. But never leave your devices unattended, right? Lock your devices if they are unattended. You know, as far as the cell phone is concerned, you know, I have this thing set up to the least amount of time to where it locks. Always have passcodes on all your devices. You can have lurkers, right? So avoid logging into some secure site or portal around people, right? Being on a train or something, some guy standing over you and watching what you're typing in. That's another way for them to get your credentials. Also, public hotspots. Just because of the nature of your work, I'm telling you, don't use public hotspots. Take your cell phone, put it on hotspot mode, connect your other devices to them. Do not use public hotspots, because there are some things that you're going to have to hit accept continue to, and you don't know if a third party is going to be accessing that data through those man-in-the-middle attacks that I mentioned. So if you have a breach, right, if it actually does happen, what do, right? You got to have a protocol in place. You have to have a protocol in place. So follow your protocol. And for me, in terms of things that I would like to see in anyone's protocol, is you want to shut down all the systems. Every minute that this stuff is on and running is another piece of information that is being encrypted or ransomed or of the sort. So you want to shut down all systems, unplug everything. You want to contact your IT department. You don't want to leave any devices unattended, right? You want to lock, oh, geez, guys, I'm so sorry. I'm like, these things are part of it. So you want to contact your IT provider or department. And then you want to, obviously, in your case, you want to contact your insurance provider, right? And make sure that, you know, they're on notice that you guys had a breach. You're doing whatever you need to do to remediate, and that's it. And that's pretty much it, guys. I mean, that's pretty much most of the information I have for you guys.